Good morning, and welcome to another episode in the museum's Stay Connected Facebook Live series. I'm your host, historian Edna Friedberg. This series gives us an opportunity to explore Holocaust history and its relevance in our world today with you, our viewers from all over the world, and we're really glad that you've joined us. As uncertainty continues about the spread of the coronavirus, as well as protests about systemic racism, many of us continue to be at home, somewhat isolated and physically separated from our friends, from our family. I imagine that many of you are like me and really miss getting together with friends and seeing people up close and in person, hugging people. In light of this reality and the fact that today is the United Nations International Day of Friendship, we want to shed light on some extraordinary personal connections that actually made the difference between life and death during the Holocaust. Please join me in welcoming our guest and my friend and museum colleague, Susan Goldstein Snyder. Good morning, Susie.
Good morning, Edna. Thank you for having me.
It's really good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Susie and her colleagues in the museum's National Institute for Holocaust Documentation work with individuals and with families who donate their personal artifacts, their objects, their physical evidence of the Holocaust to the museum's extensive collections. Susie and her team help to make these available so that we can all better understand Holocaust history in all of its human impact. During today's show, please send your questions for Susie by posting them in the comment section, and we'll get to as many of them live as we can in the course of the show. Also, rest assured that if you encounter any technical difficulties watching the live stream, you'll be able to come back to Facebook and watch the show in its entirety on demand immediately after the program. So don't worry about it. So to begin, let's make sure that people understand the context. In its early years, Susie, as you and I know, the Nazi regime was really focused on making life so unbearable, so frightening and strangling for German Jews that they would feel compelled and pressured to emigrate. But it was not an easy thing to do, even once people made that decision to leave. Could you please give our viewers a sense of some of the hurdles that German Jews and subsequently Austrian and other Jews would face in order to leave?
Sure. So you had to find a place, a country to go to, and you had to, for example, if you were going to the United States, you had to find somebody to sponsor you to come into the country. That person really had to be willing to financially disclose every bit of information about themselves. And then if you were the person who was emigrating, you had to liquidate all of your assets, which really meant behind giving them up. And you also had to have visas. And the first thing you had to do was get on a list of people, a waiting list of people to get into countries, especially the United States. And that list was quite huge. And tens of thousands of people immediately got on that list as soon as, or by the mid-30s, the list was quite high.
And we're having a look here at a photograph taken in the Austrian capital of Vienna, showing just a mob scene, a crowd of Jews in line outside of the Polish embassy, trying to get a visa to leave. People might be surprised to hear Polish embassy, but we should remember that no one could anticipate World War II before it started, and this is more than a year before Germany invades Poland. So people were really looking to neighboring countries and to any place that would give them refuge. And Susie, you're absolutely right when you describe sort of the labyrinth and the incredible complication of administrative difficulties that people would encounter. I want to give special welcome this morning, especially to some organizations who have a connection with our story today and have helped us to promote this show. Thank you for joining us from Campfire, the outdoors and community building organization for kids and teens. We're glad to see our partners from the United Nations Holocaust Outreach and Information Program, and also from the Fort Worth Sister Cities International Group. Thank you. Also, good morning to the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust in Raleigh, and to viewers who are joining us from all around the world in El Salvador, in the Philippines, in Brazil, and Germany. We're so glad you are here. So Susie, people who don't necessarily have as much familiarity with how a museum works, let's give them a little sense, because through your work with individuals and families, you and your colleagues have learned of countless compelling personal stories, and in particular ones that show how the bonds of ordinary people could be life-saving. Let's start by talking about a friendship that developed between a college student from Chicago and a middle-aged Jewish couple living in Germany.
So this story is really about Robert Harlan, who is a University of Chicago attendee and student, and here he is in his 1935 high school yearbook, senior yearbook. That year he started attending the University of Chicago, and while he was there, he met an exchange student from Würzburg, Germany, named William Stern. And it turned out that in the academic year of 38, Robert Harlan was going to Germany, and William Stern said, you have to reach out to my parents while you're there. I'll get to know, stop by. And Robert Harlan did just that. He arrived in August of 1938, and he arrived thinking that he was going to stay just for a couple of nights at the Stern's home, Bruno and Frida Stern, and he ended up staying for 10 days. And they were lovely. They went hiking. They had lovely dinners together. Robert actually documents this in a diary that he kept during the fall of 1938.
So the Sterns, I know you've described to me, they helped him to practice his German language, but they also gave him insights into what their life was becoming like as German Jews. Let's take a look at actually a page from this diary, which we have in the museum's collection. If you could maybe read it for us, I think that would be great.
Sure. On October 28th, which was still 1938, at this point, Robert is living in Marburg, Germany, and he writes, when the Sterns got home last Monday night, they discovered they had to sell their house. On Tuesday, they sold it, the price buyer being settled not by them, but by the authorities. Just like that, Dr. Stern had to stop working. He was, let me just interject and say that Bruno had a very big law practice, very prominent law practice in Würzburg. He was very well known. He was attached to the community, and he was a World War I veteran. Dr. Stern had to stop working either the 1st of December or January. I'm not sure which. I've guessed I've mentioned already the quote unquote tax Jews had to pay on purchases they make, just double what everyone else had to. So he's really describing the anti-Jewish sentiment that is going on. This is not the first time he's described it. He repeatedly makes comments throughout these agenda pages that he's keeping.
And so what he is he's a young American guy. I think he's around 20 years old at this time. And he's observing up close and personal this host family that has adopted and welcomed him, what the effect is on them. What then propelled Robert to move from feeling merely sympathy and to actually take action to help Mr. and Mrs. Stern to escape Germany?
So on the nights of November 9th and 10th, 1938, there were serious actions taken against Jews across Austria and Germany. And those actions are what we know as the Night of Broken Glass, where Jewish businesses were destroyed, synagogues were burned, homes were invaded and destroyed, and tens of thousands of men were, over the age of 16, were deported to Dachau and Buchenwald concentration camps. And this happened to the Sterns. Their apartment was ransacked, it was completely destroyed, and Dr. Stern was actually deported to Buchenwald. Here we see his card. It states that he arrived on November, well, he was deported and he was registered on November 12th, 1938. And luckily, he was only there for 10 days, but in the meantime, Robert got a telegram from somebody saying, you need to come to Würzburg immediately to the apartment. And when he arrived, he saw that there was complete chaos and complete destruction in Frida Stern's apartment.
One thing that really strikes me, it's sort of a small detail, but it's very revealing about that Buchenwald concentration camp prisoner card that you just showed us is that in the bottom left, the date and cause of Bruno Stern's arrest is listed as the Jewish action, the night of broken glass, but as a stamp. And when you think about the rest of the card is typed, it's filled in, in the moment. The authorities clearly have intent, forethought, know this is planned thing, and a planned thing of large enough scale that they go to the trouble to create stamps. I'm thinking about just kind of the emotions that Robert Harlan, he helps Mrs. Stern to clean up her ransacked apartment. And she is the mom of 3 sons. One is Robert's friend, William. All 3 sons are actually studying or living in the United States at this point. So what does he do then? What does this American kid essentially do?
Well, because the Sterns have 3 children living in the United States, they need to get out. They need to find a way to get out. And having the sons in the United States is just one step of the process. Actually getting there and getting on a boat is the other step. And Robert wanders into the American consulate, and when he's back home in Marburg or near Marburg, and he realizes that it's full, it's completely full. And he realizes that there's nothing he can do at the American consulate. So he leaves and he goes to past the kingdom, past the consulate for the United Kingdom. And he walks in and it's empty. And he realizes they could likely go through the United Kingdom to get to the United States, which is exactly what they end up doing.
So they get a transit visa while they're waiting. And to be clear, for people who may be less familiar with the status of immigration and the difficulties of it in the 1930s, the United States had strict quotas, strict limits on the numbers of people who could enter based on country of origin, on country of birth. And at the time that the Sterns were trying to emigrate, had they just simply gotten on the regular US immigration list, they would have been waiting for as long as 4 years to get there. So they do eventually make it to the United States, and we have a photograph that shows them. Susie, where is this picture and what do we see?
This is in State College, Pennsylvania, and this is 1946, and this is Robert Stern with Robert Harlan with the Stern family, the parents. And what's interesting is that not only did Robert Harlan then go on to be an American Army officer, but he went on to work as a diplomat in the State Department as well and give service to his own country.
And we see this picture here. You can see the kind of farming countryside there in State College, Pennsylvania, home to Penn State University, where one of the Stern sons is a graduate student at the time. Really a very powerful story that shows that what began as just a social interaction or a cultural exchange became something much, much more profound. And if you're curious, we'll be posting a link. You can read more entries from Robert Harlan's diary of his time in Germany on our website. Viewers, we'd like to encourage you again to please post your questions for Susie in the comment section about this story, about the context of immigration, and we'll be glad to answer them. Also want to thank viewers for joining us today from Pottstown, Pennsylvania. So we've been talking about Pennsylvania and we'll be turning to another Pennsylvania story soon. Goldsboro, North Carolina. Good morning to you in Huron, South Dakota, Boise, Idaho, Omaha, Nebraska, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Hello to viewers watching from New Orleans, from Texas, from Indiana, South Carolina, Sandy Springs, Georgia, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Yuma, Arizona, Illinois, which is Susie's home state and mine, San Antonio, Texas, and the Twin Cities in Minnesota. Susie, let's talk about another very, very personal and powerful story. Some friendships that had existed for a number of years intensified due to the worsening conditions in Europe, even despite long distances. Tell us about 2 teenage girls, Marianne Winter and Jane Bomberger.
They started actually corresponding through the Campfire Girls program. Jane was living in Reading, Pennsylvania, and Marianne was living in Vienna, Austria. Here you see them, and Jane is on the right, and Jane is on the left, Marianne is on the right. And it's interesting because Marianne was working on her English already. The letters go back and forth starting in 1935, as I mentioned. And at one point, Marianne even writes in her letters, in 1937, I really feel sorry for those German Jews and what they're going through, not realizing that she and her Jewish family would end up going through the same thing, not even a year later. And they talk about very mundane things that girls talk about: boys, what movies they're seeing, their favorite actresses and actors. They send each other little trinkets. At one point, Jane is dating somebody that later becomes her husband, goes to teachers college, and Marianne is herself working in her parents' store in Vienna, Austria.
So really the kind of, really intimate bond that in some ways letters can foster or words can foster. And realizing that even though they are so far apart and don't share an original native tongue, they have so much in common. But quickly historical events begin to creep into their letters, and Marianne turns to Jane for help. Fill us in on that, please.
After the annexation of Austria in 1938, it's clear that it's clear that Marianne's family, the Winter family, needs to find a place to go and to flee. And they don't have relatives in the United States. They don't know anyone. So while Jane and Marianne are writing to each other, Marianne actually writes a letter stating, we really have no one to turn to and know where to go. Do you know anyone who is any wealthy Americans who can sponsor us? And Jane's family responds that they're willing to sponsor the Winter family, which is Marianne, her parents, and her younger brother, Stefan.
And Susie, let's have a listen. We actually have a clip featuring, in Marianne's own words, a narration of the letter that she wrote to her pen pal in Pennsylvania asking for help.
My dear Jane, you cannot imagine how happy I was when I got your letter in all that time. Facts are that we need to emigrate under every circumstance, and of course I know that you and your family have not the money to claim for us. But I have heard there are many people who send such papers to Austrian Jews when they do not know. It is sad to say that we have no one in the USA, so that I have to ask you.
So Susie, what did it mean in practical terms for the Bombergers to respond to this plea from a family they've never met?
Well, the Bombergers really had to, Joseph Bomberger, the father, really had to state that he was going to financially support the family. And on his own affidavit of support that he filled out for the Winter family, he has 3 children, and he only claims on the affidavit of support that he has 2. And I don't know this for sure, but I'm intimating that it's because he wanted to show that he supported, he had to support less people in his family so that he could financially look more stable to help the Winters. And in fact, he was able to help them. He agreed to help them. And Mr. Winter writes back on one of Marianne's letters that he is grateful, beyond grateful, and doesn't know what to say. It's unbelievable. And he signs it, your obedient servant, your obedient servant. So it's quite, for the Winters, they realize what a gift this is, what an amazing thing that this family who doesn't even know them is willing to take on this task.
And it was a really invasive process too. Not only are they taking responsibility, but the Bombergers have to face scrutiny from their government, to give their tax returns, all these things for people to whom they owe nothing and who they don't even know. And so the Winters do make it to the United States. It's not that simple. We're having to kind of gloss over a number of hiccups in the process and delays that must have been terrifying. When do they come and where do they go?
They end up arriving in February of 1939, and they are met at the port in New York by Mr. Bomberger, who takes them to Reading, Pennsylvania, and they settle in Reading, Pennsylvania, and they're living with the Bomberger family for quite a little bit of a time before they themselves could get settled. And they end up staying there, and they create lives for themselves. And it's really quite an emotional story.
And we're looking here at a clipping from a local newspaper. This attracted press attention in Reading, around the area, saying "Hands across the sea." are joined, showing on the left Jane Bomberger, the American girl, and her Austrian Jewish pen pal on the right, Marianne Winter. The caption may be a little hard to read for people watching on a device. So I'll just note that, it describes who they are, but it doesn't name Marianne Winter by name. It says that the family, fearing retaliation on relatives that they have left behind, that the family of four declined to permit their names to be used. And here they are, living with strangers while they get on their feet, but free. You had an opportunity to get to know Marianne Winter, right, Susie, through the donation of the collection.
I did.
How did she look back on this experience?
I mean, she was very positive about it. She was very grateful to Jane and her family. The one thing that I think is really not apparent is we're talking about saving lives, but we're not really talking about what Marianne and her family left behind. Marianne was an avid swimmer. She was part of a swim club that was quite successful in Vienna. She really cherished that time. She wrote about it to Jane, and Stefan did not speak English yet at the time. So Stefan and Marianne are coming to a completely strange country. And Stefan has the disability, the crutch that he can't speak English. So that's sort of a problem for him that he has to adjust to. I mean, that's hard. It's really difficult.
You had shared with me a quote that years later, and we're looking here again at members of the two families together on the porch in Reading, that Marianne reflected on the kindness and generosity of the Bomberger family, saying, "We could have been bank robbers or murderers. They had no idea, but they thought that if we were in need, they would help, and they were terrific." Really powerful and inspiring. And in fact, I just got a note that Marianne Winter is on right now.
Oh, good.
Watching with us in the live feed. So thank you so much, Marianne, for sharing your materials with us and for enabling us to therefore share them with the world. We're so glad. Susie, you want to say hi to her?
Hi, Marianne. I hope you're doing well.
We hope that people will send in questions. We do have a few, but I want to acknowledge more international viewers from around the world, from Argentina, from the city of Glasgow in Scotland, Lisbon, Portugal. Hello to you in Chile, in Lima, Peru, in Bolivia, from Paris, from Ecuador, from Israel and Uganda. And please do send your questions. We have a couple of comments. Alfred Munzer, who is a friend of both of ours, a survivor volunteer at our museum here in Washington, and a prior guest on this show, is saying that it's so important to tell the stories of those who went counter to history. And we agree very much. Susie, we have an audience question. A woman named Louise Cherico is saying, "It is very difficult to know what to do and when. Do you feel that people do not understand the magnitude of how many people were trying to leave Europe at the same time?"
I do feel that people did not understand the magnitude. I think that often you hear comments, why didn't Jews leave earlier? Well, now I think you understand that Jews couldn't leave. You had to leave everything financially behind. You had to have transit visas. You had to have an affidavit of support. Many people fled to places like Quito, Ecuador, or to Shanghai, China, because these were places where you could go while you were waiting for your visa to come through, your immigration visa to come through. The United States did not lift their quota numbers, and they did not make it easy.
And I think also looking at this in terms of magnitude is to remember that when you see giant numbers, behind each of them is a human being with a personal experience, with fears and a life that could be saved or could be lost. We have a viewer named Christine writing that learning about their friendship, the friendship between Jane and Marianne, makes me want to reinvest my time letter writing to dear families and friends, especially right now during this pandemic when we have plenty of time at home. So that's really great to hear, Christine. And I can also say on behalf of future historians who will come in the centuries in the future, they will be very excited to read your letters as a document. Susie, in the time that we have left, let's go to one more story, one that is actually an even bigger leap of faith. Many Jews who had no connections, did not know anyone in the United States, took total shots in the dark to write to strangers to help them. Tell us about two men whose lives intersected in very profound ways, even though they shared nothing except for the same last name.
So Joseph Rosenfeld, again, in Vienna, Austria, World War I veteran, decided that he would go to the American consulate, look in a phone book for somebody with the same last name and write to them. And he wrote to Harry Rosenfeld, who was in Chicago, and he asked Harry, because he acknowledged they had nothing in common except for the same last name, but he wrote and asked if he would help sponsor him to come to the United States. And Harry wrote back and said, yes, he would. And it was quite a difficult time. There was a lot of, as Edna had mentioned before, that, just writing an affidavit of support wasn't enough. There was, people in the United States were also suffering from the impending doom of a war that was coming and the idea of the draft. And here you're looking at Joseph Rosenfeld's identification card from Vienna, Austria. You can see that there's a big J on it because this is identification card that was issued to a Jewish person. And so this was really wonderful news for Joseph in Vienna, except for that on Kristallnacht, on the night of broken glass, he was arrested and he was sent to himself the Dachau concentration camp, where he was for many months. And so even though Harry was willing to sponsor him, there were a lot of ups and downs. There were a lot of hoops to jump through. It was quite difficult, but Harry managed to do it and managed to sponsor him.
And I want to make a couple of notes on that first image that we saw of a young man in uniform was a young Joseph Rosenfeld when he was serving during the First World War in the Austro-Hungarian army. I think the juxtaposition of that, of a patriotic soldier against another card issued by his government, marking him as an outsider, shows the kind of mental shock it must have been to have your own country turn on you. Very special personal note. We have an audience comment from Danny Horwich, who I know you know well, Susie, saying, "This is my Grandpa Joe, and I am glad that my family is able to share his story." So thank you so much, Danny, for sharing your materials with us at the museum so that we can shine a light on them and help people to understand the real experiences of human beings and the trajectory they took. Joseph Rosenfeld writes this letter to Harry Rosenfeld. He is lucky that the name that he picks at random out of a phone book in Chicago, a place he's never been, reaches someone with a big heart and the courage to undertake this process in the midst of the economic Great Depression. How does Joseph eventually make it to the United States, and when?
Joseph is actually released from Dachau in July of 1939 with the understanding that he will leave. He will be leaving the country. And he has a sister and a nephew who are still there. And they also assisted in trying to help. His sister also assisted in trying to help get him out while he was in Dachau, because he could only write to his sister and not back and forth to Harry. But eventually he does get out. He leaves. He comes to the United States. And he comes to live with Harry in Chicago.
And this is 14 months after his first letter that comes to Harry out of the blue. I really can't imagine. We're looking at a letter that Harry Rosenfeld has written back to Joseph, so from Chicago to Vienna, saying, "Dear friend," remember, this is someone he's never met, he knows nothing about. "Dear friend, go to the American consul. He has all the papers for you to come to the United States. Let me know when you are leaving. Yours truly, Harry," and his address. So just truly incredible.
And Joseph ended up arriving in December of 1939 in the United States. And he left, as I mentioned, left behind family. And even after he arrived, Harry made the effort to try to get his sister and nephew out, but at that point it was too late, and they ended up being deported to Poland, where they were killed.
So a complicated story, and I want to be sure that we are not leaving people with the sense that this is just a happy ending. There is a lot of pain, a lot of loss in this, despite the best efforts of a man like Harry Rosenfeld.
And I just want to add that when I met with Joseph's daughter, we talked about what it was like to know that he was able to get out and unsuccessful in getting out his sister and nephew. It's something that you live with, I think, that is really, that stays with you.
Yeah, that survivor's guilt, and also to know that it's just on the basis of luck. It's not that he did anything particularly special or brave, or that he was a better person, just luck. We have a question from a viewer named Nancy Fodor saying, this is not a simple question, but why did the US have such low quotas and did not raise the quotas to help Jewish people?
Well, I think, we have a wonderful online exhibition that discusses that called Americans in the Holocaust. And I think that there was some of it is anti-Semitism. Some of it is that there was the fear that immigrants coming into the country would tax the United States even further. So these were huge issues that there is no good answer for.
I would also just add to that, Nancy, I think it's implicit in your question, but I'll say that the United States had no refugee policy at the time. So there was no special treatment or no fast track for Jews or for people who were fleeing violence or danger. They just had to get in line with the rest of people who would be coming for more typical reasons that someone immigrates, for economic opportunity or for adventure or wanting to reunite with someone. And there were no changes to this policy. Even efforts in the late 1930s to allow in unaccompanied kids, people who would not take a job, were rejected and never made it out of Congress. So the mood among the American public and in the American government was not one of compassion or welcome at this time. Susie, we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you for just a few reflections before we end. In your work at the museum as a collections curator, you really do have a view into extraordinary personal stories like the three we've heard today, each of them unique. What do you hope that viewers will take away from hearing about these connections and these friendships that you have shared with us today?
Well, I think it's important to understand that every collection tells a different and unique history. And that I think it's important to also point out, Edna, as you know, you donated your own family's collection to us, which we're very grateful for. And it's been wonderful. It's wonderful to have people like you who really understand that each collection tells a story that's very unique and personal. And that even if you look through our collections, even the most smallest of efforts really makes a big difference. That the smallest thing that people can do or did during the time period of the Holocaust really did make a big difference and did contribute to the humanity and the positive efforts that some people, the dangers that they took on by helping others.
Well, I want to express gratitude to you, Susie. First of all, on a personal note, for helping to process my family's collection, and therefore for us to understand it more wholly, to understand it in the wider landscape and context of what happened, but for just uncovering and preserving so many of these really powerful histories. It means a lot. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be able to be here and talk about these wonderful collections. So thank you for having me.
A viewer named Judith writes in to say that one of my relatives got out that way too, found a New York phone book and contacted someone with his same last name, and they got him out. There's so many stories that we don't know. Thank you for sharing that with us, Judith, and for also reminding us of the human capacity to be incredibly generous, to be altruistic, to help people and stick our necks out for people we don't know, to whom we owe nothing, but that we could actually make a difference. And, how many descendants of a person like that, of your relative or of Joseph Rosenfeld, owe their lives to the kindness of strangers. It is really inspiring to see the power of individuals to provide practical but also emotional sustenance. Someone like Robert Harlan helping Frida Stern to clean up her ransacked apartment sends a powerful message. And I think we should just all ask ourselves, what would I have done, and how many of us would or could do the same for a friend or for a total stranger. So thank you again for joining us this morning. We hope you will come back for our next episode in the Stay Connected Facebook Live series. We'll be coming to you on Wednesday, August 12th at 9:30 a.m., for a provocative conversation about how humor helped heal the pain of the Holocaust, which we will be exploring how humor was a lifeline even during the war, a form of protest and a way to maintain dignity for some people during the Holocaust and for some survivors afterward. So we hope to see you then. Until then, please be well. Bye-bye.